For decades, there was a belief so powerful it didn't need proof, only fear. The Mongols were unstoppable. They didn't just win battles, they erased entire civilizations. Cities didn't fall, they vanished. Armies didn't lose, they were wiped from memory. From Asia to the Middle East, the message spread faster than any army could march. Resistance was suicide. And over time, that message hardened into something far more dangerous than fear. It became destiny. Rulers stopped asking if they would be conquered and started asking when. Fortresses, once symbols of strength, became quiet prisons filled with men waiting for the inevitable. Strategy faded. Courage fractured. Because how do you fight an enemy that no one has ever defeated? But history has a pattern most people miss. The moment something feels invincible is usually the moment it's closest to breaking. In 1260, on a piece of land most people had never heard of, something unthinkable happened. Not a miracle, not luck, but a decision made by men the world had already underestimated. Because the empire that conquered the world was about to face something it had never truly encountered before. Not a stronger army, not a bigger empire, but an enemy that refused to believe in its invincibility. By the time the Mongols reached the heart of the Islamic world, they were no longer seen as just another empire expanding its borders. They had become something far more terrifying, an unstoppable force that rewrote the rules of war itself. And nowhere was that more brutally proven than in Baghdad. In 1258, Baghdad wasn't just a city. It was a symbol. For centuries, it had stood as one of the greatest centers of knowledge, wealth, and power in the world. Scholars, scientists, poets, this was where ideas shaped civilizations. And in a matter of days, it was all gone. The Mongols didn't just defeat Baghdad, they erased it. Libraries were burned, their knowledge lost to ash. Streets ran with blood. The Caliph himself, once one of the most powerful men in the world, was executed. It wasn't justice. It was a message. And the message was clear: submit or cease to exist. What followed wasn't just conquest. It was psychological warfare on a scale the world had never seen. News of Baghdad's destruction spread faster than any army could move. And with every mile, the story grew darker. Entire populations wiped out. Cities turned into warnings. Hope itself began to feel like a liability. Across the region, rulers faced an impossible choice: fight and risk total annihilation, or surrender and pray for mercy that rarely came. But even surrender wasn't a guarantee of survival. That was part of the Mongol strategy. Uncertainty became their greatest weapon. Because when people don't know what choice leads to survival, fear takes control. Some leaders convinced themselves their walls would hold. Massive fortifications, reinforced gates, towering defenses, surely that would be enough. But the Mongols had already broken stronger cities. They adapted, learned, and crushed anything that stood still long enough to be destroyed. Other leaders argued for surrender, hoping to avoid the fate of Baghdad. But surrender came with its own cost: humiliation, loss of power, and often, eventual death anyway. There was no good option left, only different ways to lose. Syria became the next domino. The tension in the region was suffocating. Every decision felt like a gamble with extinction. And then the storm hit Aleppo. That was swift and horrifying. Defenses that were meant to last months collapsed in days. From the citadel, defenders watched helplessly as their city was torn apart beneath them. Streets turned into slaughterhouses. Homes became traps. And when the city finally surrendered, there was no mercy waiting on the other side. Men were executed. Families were massacred. Another city reduced to a warning sign for anyone still thinking of resistance. And that was the real power of the Mongols. They didn't just win battles. They taught entire regions that resistance was pointless. Damascus saw what happened in Aleppo and made a different choice. There was no last stand, no heroic defense. The gates opened. The city surrendered almost without a fight. Mongol forces entered not as attackers, but as rulers stepping into a world that already believed it was defeated. It was quiet, efficient, almost chilling in its simplicity. Within just a few years, the balance of power in the region had completely collapsed. The Ayyubid dynasty, once strong enough to challenge crusaders and control major cities, disintegrated under the pressure. Their past victories meant nothing now. Strength, legacy, reputation, all of it proved useless against an enemy that didn't play by the old rules. And that's when the reality became unavoidable. There was only one major power left standing between the Mongols and total dominance of the region: Egypt. But calling Egypt safe would have been dangerously misleading. This wasn't a united, stable empire waiting to rise to the occasion. Internally, it had been fractured for years. Power struggles, betrayals, shifting alliances, the kind of instability that usually invites invasion, not resistance. And yet, it was all that remained. Egypt wasn't the strongest. It wasn't the richest. And it certainly wasn't the most stable. But it was the last line. The final barrier between the Mongols and complete control of the Middle East. Which meant one thing: if Egypt fell, there would be nothing left to stop them. No second chances. No reinforcements. No hidden power waiting in the wings. Just a clear path forward for an empire that had already conquered most of the known world. That's what made this moment so dangerous. Because for the first time, the question wasn't whether the Mongols would win. It was whether anyone on Earth still had the ability or the courage to prove they could lose. Egypt didn't look like a nation ready to save anything. If anything, it looked like a place that should collapse next. Power had changed hands violently, not through stability or long-term vision, but through force. The men now in control were not born into royalty or raised to rule. They were made. Forged in a system that took boys from distant lands, stripped them of their past, and rebuilt them into something entirely different. They were the Mamluks. Sold as slaves, trained as elite warriors, and conditioned to survive in a world where hesitation meant death. The Mamluks were unlike any ruling class the region had ever seen. They didn't inherit power, they seized it. Years before the Mongols arrived, they had already overthrown their own masters. And after that, they turned on each other, fighting brutal internal conflicts for control of Egypt. Loyalty was fragile. Trust was rare. Survival was everything. And yet, that same brutal system had created something dangerous. A military force hardened beyond fear. Among them was a man whose life seemed almost designed for this exact moment: Baibars. He hadn't started as a hero. He hadn't even started as free. As a child, his world was shattered by the same forces now advancing toward Egypt. His people were driven from their land. Violence followed them. Many didn't survive. Baibars himself was captured, sold, and dragged across regions like property. By the time he reached Egypt, whatever life he had before was gone. But in Egypt, he was rebuilt. He trained relentlessly: horseback archery, close combat, discipline, endurance. The kind of training that doesn't just prepare you for battle, but reshapes how you think, how you react, how you survive. Pain wasn't something to avoid. It was something to adapt to. Fear wasn't something to feel. It was something to control. Over time, Baibars became more than a soldier. He became a weapon. But Egypt wasn't united under him. Not yet. At the top stood Sultan Kuz, a man who understood the stakes better than most. He had taken power not long before the Mongol threat reached its peak, and he knew his position was far from secure. Like many Mamluk leaders, his authority came from strength, not tradition. And strength, in that world, was always being tested. The tension between Kuduz and Baibars was real. These were not lifelong allies bound by trust. They were rivals who had survived the same brutal system, each capable of leading, each capable of taking power. Under normal circumstances, they might have destroyed each other. But these were not normal circumstances. Because the Mongols were coming. And everything changed when that reality became impossible to ignore. News of destroyed cities, massacred populations, and collapsing kingdoms had already reached Cairo. This wasn't speculation. This was a pattern. And every leader in Egypt understood what it meant. They were next. Then came the message. It arrived the way Mongol messages often did: cold, precise, and designed to break you before the battle even began. There was no negotiation in it. No attempt at diplomacy. Just a demand. submit. The letter made it clear, resistance was pointless. No army could stop them. No walls could protect them. No prayers would save them. It wasn't just a warning, it was a psychological weapon. Because by the time a Mongol army arrived, the real battle had often already been won in the minds of their enemies. City after city had received similar messages. Most had made the same calculation. Survival, if it was even possible, meant surrender. Qutuz read the message and did something almost unthinkable. He refused. Not quietly, not cautiously, publicly. He ordered the Mongol envoys executed. Their heads were displayed at the gates of Cairo, a direct, undeniable signal. There would be no submission, no negotiation, no middle ground. It was a decision that changed everything. Because in that moment, Egypt stopped reacting and started choosing. There's a difference between fighting because you're forced to and fighting because you decide to. One is driven by fear, the other by conviction. And that shift, subtle as it seems, can change the outcome of everything that follows. For Baibars, the decision carried even deeper weight. The same force that had destroyed his childhood was now threatening the only world he had left. This wasn't just strategy. It was personal. And for the first time, the internal divisions within Egypt began to close. Not completely, not perfectly, but enough. Qutuz and Baibars aligned. Not because they trusted each other, but because the alternative was extinction. Whatever rivalries existed between them were now secondary to a much larger threat. They didn't need to like each other. They just needed to survive the same enemy. And so, preparations began. This wasn't going to be a defensive war behind walls. That approach had already failed across the region. Strong cities had fallen. Fortresses had been crushed. Waiting for the Mongols to arrive was a strategy that led to one outcome. So they chose something different. They would meet them in the field. It was a dangerous decision, maybe even reckless. But it was also the only move that offered any real chance of changing the outcome. Because if you fight an unstoppable force the same way everyone else did, you get the same result. As the Mamluk army began to move north, toward a confrontation that would decide far more than just territory, one thing became clear. This was no longer just about stopping an invasion. It was about proving that the Mongols could be stopped at all. The march north wasn't just a military movement, it was a calculated gamble. Every mile the Mamluks advanced brought them closer to an enemy that had never truly been stopped, only delayed. Behind them was Egypt, the last line. Ahead of them was a force that had crushed empires without slowing down. There was no illusion about what this meant. If they failed here, there would be nothing left to regroup, nowhere left to retreat. And the road itself was far from safe. Crusader strongholds still dotted the coastline, watching carefully. These were not allies in any traditional sense. In another moment, they might have been enemies. But fear has a way of reshaping alliances. The Mongols had become a greater threat than old rivalries. So instead of resistance, the Mamluks encountered something unexpected. Tolerance, even quiet cooperation. Passage was allowed. Supplies moved, not out of trust, but out of shared fear. That alone said everything about the moment. When your enemy would rather see you pass than face what's coming behind you, the threat is real. As they moved deeper into the Levant, Baibars pushed ahead, scouting terrain, reading the land like a strategist who understood that this battle wouldn't be won by strength alone. It would be decided by positioning, timing, and control. He found it in a place called Ein Jalet, the Spring of Goliath, a landscape of rolling ground, narrow approaches, and hidden folds that could conceal movement. It wasn't just a battlefield. It was a setup. On September 3, 1260, both armies stood ready. The Mongols, even reduced in number, carried the same reputation that had shattered armies across continents. Their strength wasn't just in numbers, it was in execution. Speed, coordination, psychological pressure. They could strike, retreat, and strike again before most opponents even understood what was happening. They had turned warfare into something fluid, unpredictable, and devastatingly efficient. Facing them, the Mamluks formed their lines, not as a single uniform force, but as a layered structure built around elite cavalry. These were not ordinary soldiers. They were trained from youth for this exact moment. Horse and rider moving as one, archers capable of striking at speed, fighters conditioned to hold under pressure that had broken countless others. But none of that erased the reality. They were still facing the Mongols. And when the battle began, it looked exactly like every other Mongol victory. The first came fast. Cavalry surged forward, arrows cutting through the air with deadly precision. The impact was immediate. Mamluk fighters fell. Lines strained. For a moment, it felt familiar, like the beginning of another collapse, another army about to break under the weight of something unstoppable. This was the moment where most battles had already been decided. Because this wasn't just physical, it was psychological. The Mongols didn't just defeat armies, they broke their will. Once fear took over, discipline disappeared. Orders were ignored, units fractured, and the rest was just cleanup. But this time, something held. Kutuz moved through the chaos, not from a distance, but from within it. He shouted to his men, calling them to stand, to hold, to fight not just for survival, but for something larger. It wasn't just command, it was presence. And in that moment, it mattered. Because the line didn't break. To bend. It strained, but it held. And that changed everything. The Mamluks absorbed and then they answered. Steel met steel. Horses collided. The battlefield compressed into something brutal and immediate. This was no longer about maneuvering at distance. It became close, violent, personal. The kind of fighting where skill, endurance, and instinct take over. But the real turning point wasn't just resistance. It was design. Because what looked like pressure was part of the plan. Baibars had anticipated the Mongol response. He understood their rhythm, the way they pressed harder when they sensed weakness, the way they pursued when an enemy appeared to falter. So he gave them exactly what they expected. Movement. Retreat. Just enough to pull them forward. The Mongols advanced, confident, aggressive, pushing into what looked like opportunity. But the terrain began to tighten. The ground shifted. Visibility changed. And then, from positions they hadn't fully seen, hidden reserves emerged. Fresh Mamluk forces surged into the fight. What had felt like momentum suddenly became pressure from the other side. At nearly the same time, something else fractured the Mongol position. One of their allied commanders defected mid-battle, weakening a critical flank at the worst possible moment. It wasn't just a tactical shift, it was a psychological crack. For an army built on coordination and control, even a small disruption could ripple outward. And the Mamluks hit that weakness hard. Now the fight changed direction. The Mongols were no longer advancing, they were reacting. The battlefield tightened further. What had started as fluid, mobile warfare collapsed into something dense and unforgiving. Archers still fired from the edges, but at the center, it became a storm of close combat, blades, armor, impact. No room for maneuver. No space to reset. For the first time in living memory, the Mongol line began to give. Not all at once. Not dramatically, but visibly. Some units dismounted, choosing to fight where they stood rather than attempt a retreat that no longer looked clean. Others tried to regroup, but the pressure was constant. The rhythm that had defined Mongol warfare, their ability to control the flow, was breaking. At the center of it all stood Kibuka, a commander known for discipline, for strength, for refusing to yield. Even as the situation shifted, even as the window for retreat narrowed, he stayed. Whether it was pride, conviction, or something deeper, it didn't matter. He chose to fight. And he was captured, then executed. That moment carried weight far beyond the battlefield. Because this wasn't just a loss. It was proof. Proof that the Mongols could be beaten. Not avoided. Not delayed. Beaten. And once that realization spread, the rest followed quickly. The Mongol forces broke. Not in a controlled withdrawal, but in a collapse. Units scattered, trying to escape through terrain that now worked against them. The same land that had hidden the Mamluk trap now became a barrier. Pursuit was relentless. There was no pause, no hesitation. The Mamluks pressed forward, cutting down those who tried to flee, denying any chance of regrouping. By the end, it was over. not a stalemate, not a partial victory. A decisive break. A moment where something that had defined an entire era, Mongol invincibility, was shattered in full view of the world. And just like that, the unstoppable had been stopped. What happened at Ain Jalut wasn't just a victory, it was a rupture in reality. For years, the Mongols had moved through the world like a force of nature, something to endure, not defeat. Kingdoms didn't plan to win against them, they planned how to survive them. But in a single, brutal day in 1260, that belief collapsed. The myth of invincibility, the idea that some powers simply cannot be stopped, was broken in full view of history. But victory didn't bring peace. It rarely does. On the road back to Cairo, the unity that held the Mamluks together under pressure began to crack. Power, once shared out of necessity, became something to claim. Sultan Kuz, the man who chose defiance, who held the line when it mattered most, was assassinated before he could truly secure what he had won. And from that chaos, Baibars rose. Not just as a survivor, but as a ruler. He didn't treat Ain Jalut as an ending. He treated it as a beginning. Under his leadership, the Mamluks didn't just defend, they adapted, strengthened, and prepared for what came next. Because the Mongols didn't disappear, they fractured. Internal divisions, rivalries, and a growing civil war began to pull their empire apart from within. And that fracture mattered almost as much as the battle itself. Because Ain Jalut proved something deeper than a military outcome. It proved that even the most dominant force can break, especially when it begins to believe its own myth. That's why this story still matters today. Not because it ended a war, not because it created peace, but because it showed that unstoppable is often just a story waiting for the right moment and the right people to prove it wrong. If you're drawn to stories like this, where power, strategy, and human decisions reshape history, make sure to subscribe, hit like, and follow the channel. Because the next story might challenge everything you think is unbreakable.